I don't know how to explain the moment everything shifted, how something as small, as gentle, as unexpected as a cat resting his head on my hand could change the course of my entire life. But it did, and if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand why I still think about that moment every single day, and why I still believe it saved me in ways nothing else ever could. I'm not someone who cries easily, or at least I wasn't back then. I used to be the kind of woman who just pushed everything down. Every feeling, every doubt, every fear. I thought that being strong meant keeping all of that hidden. I thought that silence was strength. I thought that holding everything together meant I was doing fine. But I wasn't. And the people around me didn't really see it. Or maybe they didn't want to. Or maybe I was just too good at pretending. Either way, I was falling apart on the inside long before that afternoon. Back then, I lived alone in a small apartment. The kind where you can hear every footstep from the hallway, and every distant conversation through the vents. It felt temporary, even though I'd lived there for almost 2 years. My job was demanding, my schedule unpredictable, and somewhere along the way, I stopped inviting people into my home. It felt easier that way, less explaining, less faking smiles, less pretending that I was okay. Sometimes I wonder how I didn't notice I was isolating myself, how I didn't see the signs piling up day after day. But that's the tricky thing about collapsing slowly. You don't feel the fall until you hit the floor. I never planned to adopt a cat. It wasn't something I thought about, or dreamed about, or even considered. If you had told me a year earlier that an animal would become the most important part of my life, I would have laughed. I barely took care of myself. I wasn't looking for anything else to be responsible for. But life has a way of placing things in front of you exactly when you need them, even if you have no idea you need them. It was a Saturday. I remember that clearly because Saturday was supposed to be my reset day, the day I tried to convince myself that I would organize things, rest, maybe even enjoy something. But like most Saturdays, I woke up exhausted, drained before I even got out of bed. Still, I forced myself outside. I told myself I just needed a walk, maybe fresh air, maybe a distraction. I didn't know where I was going until I got there, the animal shelter near the edge of town. I'd passed by it dozens of times but never stepped inside. That day, I did. The smell hit me first. Cleaner, disinfectant, a hint of something warm and familiar. Then the sounds. Soft meows, the occasional bark, footsteps from volunteers. I didn't even know why I walked in. I felt out of place, like someone had made a mistake and let me into a room I wasn't meant to be in. A woman at the front desk greeted me with a smile that felt too bright for the heavy fog in my chest. She asked if I was looking to adopt. I opened my mouth to say no, but for some reason, the word didn't come out. I just stood there, and she took that as a yes. She led me into one of the cat rooms. I expected chaos, climbing, scratching, jumping, but instead, there was this strange calm. A few cats slept curled in beds. Others watched from perches. A young volunteer cleaned a litter box in the corner. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt compared to everything inside my head. And then I saw him. He was sitting in a metal enclosure, not crying, not pacing, not trying to get my attention. Just sitting, watching, observing everything like it all mattered deeply. He was orange with faint tabby stripes and big amber eyes that looked older than he was. His tag said Milo, a common name, a warm name, the kind of name you'd give a cat who belonged in someone's home, not in a shelter waiting behind a metal door. I don't know what pulled me toward him. Maybe it was how still he was. Maybe it was how he didn't seem desperate for attention like some of the others. Maybe it was because, in that moment, I felt like I was looking at another quiet soul who knew what it was like to keep everything inside. But I walked toward him, slowly, almost afraid to scare away the connection I wasn't fully aware I was making. He blinked at me. Once, twice. Then he lifted his paw and rested it gently against the glass door of his enclosure. It wasn't dramatic or loud or attention-seeking. It was subtle, soft, like he was asking, "Are you here for me?" The volunteer walking by noticed me staring and asked if I wanted to meet him. My voice didn't cooperate, so I just nodded. She opened the enclosure, picked him up carefully, and placed him in my arms before I could second-guess anything. He didn't resist, didn't tense, didn't try to escape. Instead, he pressed his face lightly into my shoulder, then settled his body against mine like he had known me longer than a few seconds. I felt something loosen in my chest, something I'd been holding for far too long. "He really likes you," the volunteer whispered. But that wasn't the moment everything changed. No, that moment came later. I ended up taking Milo home that same day. It wasn't planned. I wasn't prepared. I didn't have food bowls or toys or even a litter box yet. The shelter gave me a starter kit and wished me luck, and I walked out of there with a warm, breathing life in my arms and 1,000 questions in my head. What was I doing? Why was I doing it? Would I be able to take care of him? Would he be happy with me? What if I wasn't good enough? But Milo didn't seem worried. He rested his head against my arm the whole drive home, purring softly like he already trusted me, like he already belonged. I don't know why that broke me a little. Maybe because I wasn't used to something, or someone, depending on me without expecting perfection. When we got home, I set him down gently in the living room. He explored slowly at first, sniffing corners, brushing against furniture, studying everything with those thoughtful eyes. I sat on the couch, feeling strangely nervous, like I was waiting for him to decide whether or not he wanted to stay. But after a few minutes, he walked back to me, climbed onto my lap without hesitation, curled up, and took a deep breath, settling into sleep as if he had been waiting for this exact place, this exact moment. And even then, I didn't understand how deeply my life would change because of him. That moment came a week later. It had been a difficult day, one of those days when everything felt heavier than usual, when the world felt too loud and my thoughts felt too sharp. I came home drained, dropped my bag by the door, and sat on the floor instead of the couch. I don't know why. I just needed to feel grounded, maybe. Needed to feel something familiar. I covered my face with my hands and tried to breathe through the knot tightening in my chest. I didn't call Milo. I didn't even think about where he was. But a few seconds later, I heard soft footsteps approach me. He sat beside me quietly at first, observing me the same way he had at the shelter. And then, without making a sound, he leaned forward, pressed his warm forehead gently against my arm, and rested his head on my hand. That was the moment. Something inside me cracked. Not in a painful way, but in a way that made room for air I hadn't been able to breathe in months. I felt this wave of emotion rise from deep within me, not overwhelming, but releasing, like a tide finally pulling back after clawing at the shore for too long. I didn't push it away. For once, I didn't try to swallow it or bury it or pretend I was fine. Milo lifted his head slightly, looked at me with those slow blinking amber eyes, and then lowered his head again onto my hand, with an exhale so soft it felt like a whisper. It was as if he was saying, "I'm here. You're not alone. Not anymore." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I actually believed it. That moment became the anchor I didn't know I needed. It was the shift, the turning point, the quiet beginning of healing I hadn't been able to start on my own. From that day on, everything changed. Not instantly, not magically, not perfectly, but meaningfully. Milo had this strange ability to sense when I was struggling. He would come sit with me, or bring me one of his toys, or curl up against my side until my breathing slowed. He made me get out of bed on mornings when I felt like I couldn't. He made me laugh at the small things again, like when he chased imaginary dust particles or tried to fit himself into boxes way too small for him. But the real change didn't happen outside. It happened inside me. And it all started with that simple, gentle moment. His head resting on my hand. I don't know how many minutes I stayed there on the floor that evening, my hand under his warm cheek, his body curled against my leg, like he had decided that was exactly where he needed to be. I remember my breathing slowing. I remember the trembling in my chest easing. I remember feeling like someone had finally reached into the darkness I'd been sitting in for months and turned on a small light, just enough to see the path forward. That night, Milo slept beside me on the bed for the first time. He stretched out across the blanket, placing one paw gently against my arm as if afraid I'd disappear if he didn't keep a part of himself touching me. And when I woke up the next morning, he was still there, purring softly, his eyes opening slowly as I stirred. That simple closeness, that quiet presence. I didn't realize how desperately I'd needed it until it became part of my everyday life. Before Milo, my routine was mechanical. Wake up exhausted, drag myself through the morning, push through work, come home drained, try to distract myself until I fell asleep again. I didn't have joy built into my days. I didn't have softness. I didn't have anything that grounded me in the present moment. But with Milo, everything gained meaning through the simplest things. I began waking up earlier, not because I suddenly had more energy, but because he would crawl onto my chest and nudge my chin with his head, demanding attention and breakfast in the most unapologetically adorable way. His insistence on starting the day turned those quiet mornings into something warm instead of something heavy. He made me laugh again. That was the biggest surprise. I had forgotten what that felt like. To laugh without forcing it, without pretending. He'd do these small, ridiculous things that would break through whatever weight I was carrying, like sprinting through the hallway for no reason, or pawing at my ankle when he wanted me to follow him somewhere, or sitting dramatically in front of my laptop whenever I was working from home, staring at me like he was my tiny orange supervisor. And the thing that amazed me most was how he always seemed to know. On the days when my thoughts were loud and my chest felt tight, he stayed close. On the days when I felt numb, he'd bring over his favorite toy, a little stuffed fish with a frayed tail, and drop it in front of me like an offering. On the rare days when I cried, he'd sit directly in my lap, plant himself firmly, and purr louder than usual, as if trying to drown out whatever hurt I had inside me. I don't think people realize how intuitive animals can be. They don't use words, but they speak with their presence, their energy, their closeness. Milo was the first being in a long time who didn't ask anything of me except my company. And somehow, that was enough to pull me out of the place I'd been sinking into. The more time passed, the more I noticed myself changing in ways I didn't expect. I started taking better care of my home, not out of obligation, but because I wanted Milo to be comfortable and happy. I cooked more often because the smell interested him, and his curiosity made me feel less alone in the kitchen. I started opening the blinds in the morning to let the sunshine in, just because he loved sitting in that warm light, stretching lazily and blinking at me like he was inviting me to enjoy it too. There was one moment, about a month after I adopted him, that made me realize just how far I'd come. I was sitting on the couch after work, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, feeling that familiar fog creeping in. The kind that used to swallow entire evenings without warning. I didn't want to feel it again. Didn't want to lose myself in it the way I used to. And before I even had time to overthink, Milo jumped onto the couch, walked across my lap, and pressed his forehead against my cheek. Firm, warm, intentional. It was the same gesture from the shelter, the same gesture from the night he rested his head on my hand. It felt like a reminder, a promise, a gentle nudge telling me, "You're not going back there. Not now. Not with me here." I took a deep breath, and the fog lifted. Not all the way, not magically, but enough for me to feel present again. That was when I realized I wasn't just getting better. I was healing. Not because something dramatic happened, not because my life suddenly became perfect, but because this small, consistent presence beside me reminded me every day that I mattered, at least to him. And sometimes, that's all someone needs to start believing they matter in their own life too. I began talking to him more, even though he obviously couldn't understand every word. But talking to him made me feel heard. It made me feel lighter. I told him about my day, my worries, the things that made me anxious. I told him things I'd never told anyone else because he didn't judge, didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions. He just listened in the only way he could, by staying close. One night I came home later than usual, drained beyond anything I'd felt in weeks. I set my keys down, took off my shoes, and leaned my back against the door, sliding slowly to the floor. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there, staring at the shadows pooling under the hallway light. Milo appeared almost immediately, trotting toward me with his tail held high. He sat down right in front of me, staring into my eyes with a seriousness that didn't match his tiny body. Then, without warning, he climbed into my lap, circled twice, and curled himself into the shape of a warm, purring comma across my thighs. I didn't move. I didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to soften everything inside me. But the moment that truly stays with me happened a few weeks later. It was early morning, too early for alarms, too early for the sun to fully rise. I woke up from a restless sleep, my thoughts racing with things I didn't want to think about. I turned onto my side, pressing my face into the pillow to steady my breathing. And then I felt it. Milo nudging his head under my chin, lifting my face gently the way he always did when he wanted me to look at him. He didn't meow. He didn't move away. He just placed his head on my hand again, the same hand he had rested on that first night, and held himself there, still and steady. That was it. That was all it took for something in me to settle, for the rising panic to dissolve. And I realized, with a kind of quiet clarity that felt almost overwhelming, that this small creature had given me something I had been missing for years. Connection. Comfort. A reason to get up. A reminder that I wasn't invisible, that I wasn't drifting alone through my days. Healing doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it comes from a soft weight on your hand in the early morning light. Sometimes it comes from a slow blink, a warm purr, a head resting gently on your skin. Sometimes it comes from allowing yourself to be loved by something that asks for nothing but the chance to love you back. Milo changed my life in that moment, but more importantly, he kept changing it every day after. He taught me to slow down. He taught me to breathe. He taught me to notice things I had stopped appreciating. Sunlight on the wall, quiet mornings, the gentle rhythm of routine. He taught me that companionship doesn't have to be loud or complicated. Sometimes it's just presence, warmth, trust. I don't know what my life would look like if I hadn't walked into that shelter. I don't know who I would be without him. But I'm grateful every day that I'll never have to know the answer. Because Milo gave me back pieces of myself I thought were gone. And it all started with a moment so small, so gentle, so unexpected. A moment where he rested his head on my hand and reminded me that even in the quietest corners of life, healing is possible. Thank you for listening to my story, for staying with me until the end, and for allowing me to share the moment that changed everything for me. If this story touched you in any way, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who might need a reminder that comfort can come from the most unexpected places. Thank you again for watching, and may peace follow you wherever you go.